I'd like to bring up one last point that comes from the case. It's the ending of the case. The case ends on this kind of tragic, ambiguous note. We have this successfully functioning market over a very long period of time, and then really very, very suddenly it stops. It seems to stop working. And we have other evidence for its disappearance. And it's worth noting that the Rome that disappears in the 3rd century, we call this the crisis of the 3rd century, never really comes back. When Roman authority is reestablished at the end of the 3rd century, at the beginning of the 4th century after the reforms of Diocletian, the center of Rome, of the Roman Empire, is no longer in Rome, in Italy, but rather in Constantinople, in what is now Turkey. But the empire shifts east. So this chapter in the 3rd century, this crisis of the 3rd century, which shuts the lights out on the Roman Empire, they never really come back on in the West. And the whole system that supported the Roman metropolis for that period of time never really gets restored. How can we explain what happened to Rome? And perhaps more importantly, what lesson might we ourselves want to draw from this? What might explain how a complex system that's organized itself in such a way so as to be sustainable over a very long period of time, what might explain, in a word, why it would suddenly fail? We should know, because we ourselves have seen it, have we not? We all woke up that September morning in 2008 and watched as the global credit markets simply froze overnight, right? Just one day, they were not functioning anymore and plunged the economy into global crisis from which we still have barely recovered. So we've all seen it. I mean, perhaps before 2008, we might be skeptical that a complex market could simply collapse, but having witnessed it with our own eyes, we know what it looks like. What is it that the system needs in order to continue functioning? What disappeared September 2008 when Lehman Brothers collapsed? What disappeared that didn't let the market continue? Trust, confidence, right? When the market loses confidence, it can no longer function. And that's where, of course, we should then direct our attention. The idea that the Roman Empire was no longer at peace is partly true, that the empire breaks up into three. There's civil war, there's strife, and so on. So there are these exogenous factors that seem to contribute to the erosion of confidence. And no one really knows. Unfortunately, no one sat down and wrote a book entitled Why the Grain Trade Failed, a case study for MBA students. But what we do know is that as a result of the nature of Roman expansion itself over the course of the 1st and 2nd centuries, this engendered a need for increased military expenditure. The more territory you have under your control, under a scheme in which you are constantly exploiting the periphery in order to send surplus rents back to the center, requires an army to keep people in line, because people aren't willingly and voluntarily going to submit themselves to that kind of subjugation. So as the Roman Empire expands, what you find is that their military expenditure, their military costs also increase. And Rome was under a fixed gold standard. The only money available to the Roman economy was what they could dig out of the ground in gold and silver. So here you have a problem. On the one hand, you have expanding military costs. At the same time, you have essentially fixed money supply. What do? Well, the first thing you do is you try and get more money, right? Raise taxes, see if you can extract more cash from people. But once you've exhausted your ability to squeeze surplus revenues out of the system, what do you do then? What did we do in 2008? Print, right? We went in on weekends to all of the central banks around the world and we just turned the printers and we just produced massive amounts of cash, right? We're still doing it today. Printed huge amounts of extra money. Well, the Romans couldn't print money because they didn't have printed money. They did the next best thing, which is they took a 100% gold coin, they added a little stuff in there, and they made it 90%, and bang, they'd increase their money supply. And once they got away with it, and governments behave this way the world through, right? Once you find out that you can actually make money out of nothing, what do governments tend to do? They do it again, right? It's like, well, that worked, we'll try that again. And so what we find is that over the course of 50 years or so, there's a steady debasement of Roman coinage, easily traced in the numismatics that we have still today. Why? Because there are many bills you don't necessarily have to pay on time, but your soldier's salary is not one of them. An unpaid soldier is a very dangerous thing. They don't have cash, and they're armed. And now you've made them angry, right? This is not good conditions. Angry, unpaid, armed people are not what you want to have around. So you need to pay your soldiery, and you have run out of money, so what you do is you expand your money supply and you pay your soldiery with that. And so what you find is then that this increasing need for military expenditure leads to a steady debasement of the money supply, such that over a 40 or 50-year period, Roman coins go from being 100 or near 100% pure to 5% pure. It happens over a very short period of time. How can we correlate this kind of debasement of a currency to the rapid loss of confidence in the market? And that's why I think our own experience empirically from 2008 is helpful to us. Because what we see is that the confidence gradually gets pulled away, but the market doesn't react evenly, does it? There's a critical moment, there's a tipping point, there's a moment at which the market simply stops to function. Some event happens and then the confidence disappears. So all of the conditions are gradually accumulating, and there's some event, and then the next thing, the market cannot work anymore and confidence is gone. And that's presumably, if it happened to our economy as a result of Lehman Brothers in 2008, who knows what the Roman Lehman Brothers was, but something obviously happened, and then the confidence the market needed to function disappeared and didn't come back. Well, that's too bad for the Romans, but that's not really our concern here. Why is that of interest to us? I think what's interesting about that to us is the reason why the Romans needed to debase their currency in the first place, which was they kept this policy of expansion in place. They needed to have new territories brought under their control in order to provide for the goods that the center had grown to need. And that need for constant expansion then engendered additional costs, which ultimately the state was not able to bear. But the key question here, the key point for us here is growth. Because that is the benchmark of success that we have introduced into our own managerial culture. How do you know if you're doing a good job at your firm? You know because this quarter you did better than last quarter. Because this year your firm did better than last year. The only benchmark of managerial success that we allow ourselves is to do better than we did before. Is that, in fact, a sustainable or even a desirable model? Why is it unacceptable to say, good news, this quarter my performance is about the same as last quarter. Maybe a little better, maybe a little worse, but about the same. Why is that not a reasonable thing for us to say? Part of the problem is how we locate the concept of a firm that is in equilibrium with its market. If you're a firm and you're not growing market share, do you have a problem? What would we say? If you're a firm that's not growing your revenues, do you have a problem? If you're a firm that's not increasing your profitability, do you have a problem? And the answer is, over and over again, yes, because that's the benchmark of success that we know. One of the questions that we want to put into play in this course in general is, what kinds of consequences are there for firms operating in an environment where the only benchmark for success is that model of growth? Is that sustainable? Can firms actually generate good long-term outcomes if that's the only benchmark of success that we know? Or should we instead consider offering ourselves the latitude to expand the benchmarks of success? The case of Rome should be, in this case, for us, interesting. Because what we see is that Rome essentially moves out of an equilibrium and as a result ends up destroyed. Or at least the market ends up destroyed. If it's not good for Rome, it's not good for a firm. Firms need to be able, managers of firms need to be able to identify and then try to achieve equilibrium with their market. And that should be a benchmark of success. And we need to give ourselves that piece of vocabulary back when we think about what good management practice is. It's an idea that we're going to carry forward throughout this class. And I want to leave you with just one small piece of information, which I think underscores why that's such an important question to ask. Since the 1930s, the average life expectancy of a firm has fallen by more than half. By more than half. It is possible that that's simply because markets have become more efficient at moving unproductive firms out of the marketplace and into bankruptcy where they belonged. That's certainly a possibility that we need to entertain. But there's another possibility, which is to say that the management principles that inform the direction of those firms are no longer serving the interests of the firm itself. and that divergence of management principle and firm outcome has actually led to the diminution of their life expectancy. It's a critical question for our general capitalist economy, and it's a critical question that we'll be considering over the rest of this class indeed. Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.